Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 304 of CryptoBiography, and it's part 11 of The Brick Wall. And here we go. Carson went home and met with Lydia. He described what had happened and how he'd made Jake a deal that would make him happy either way. I win and become a big name for him, or I lose and I do the work for him. Saying it out loud helped him see the flaws in his grand plan. Lydia was trying to smile supportively, but he could see she was hurting. "Yeah, I know," he said. "I've got to win these 3 bouts." Lydia nodded and then put her arms around his waist and gave him a hug. He got the feeling she wanted to say something, but didn't press her. If she felt it was important, she was sure of her facts, he knew she would say it. Next few days went by and his injuries healed quickly, and well. Even that Monday, he did a full workout and did an hour run around the neighborhood. On Wednesday, his workout would be followed by the announcement of the matches for Carson's first purse fight. It happened Wednesday nights, for the Saturday matches happening 10 days later. That gave the crowd some time to get excited for the matches, place bets, and word to get around. Jake was slowly getting better, too. While the gym was busy enough during his sparring bouts, it was positively packed on fight nights. He'd cleaned up as best he could and was watching the pomp and circumstance as the bouts were announced. They were done from the lightest weights upward. His bout would be announced near the end. By now, he'd taken the measure of the other heavyweights. 2, Jimmy Jones and Steve Behan, he knew he could take. He'd even done some informal sparring with them and knew that they knew it too. The room kept cheering as each bout was announced. The 3rd heavyweight, Wallopin' Walt Streech, had the most fights under his belt and was recognized as Jake's heavyweight champion. His nickname was well earned. When he hit the heavy bag, the thud reverberated around the room. The heavyweights were being announced. "And in the heavyweight division," Jake was saying loudly from a soapbox in the middle of the ring, "in his first purse match, young and hungry, big and strong, lean and mean, it's Carson, the Brick Wall Brax." All eyes turned to him, and he raised his fists over his head in acknowledgement. As with every announcement, there was some applause, though as the relative newcomer, it was muted. Carson looked at Jimmy and Steve, wondering which he would be paired with. "And he'll be fighting fan favorite Wallopin' Walt Streech." The crowd roared. Carson looked at Walt Streech, who was looking back at him levelly. He tried to look intimidating. So, that was it. Jake wasn't going to give him any breaks. If Carson was to win 3 matches in a row, they would be as difficult as Jake could make them. He could see everyone looking at him and at Walt Streech, sizing them up. He knew, based on Walt's record and reputation, that he would be the underdog, and by a lot. He would have to figure out how to unleash himself, and soon. He kept up his false front of bravado until the crowd dispersed. Walt Streech left with several people around him. Carson waited a few minutes, then headed for home. He thought all the way home about the upcoming fight. How could he get an advantage? He was working out hard, but Streech was strong too, and from everything he'd heard, had good wind. So he might have an edge in strength, but if he wasn't using it fully, it might not help. He was a little heavier and definitely taller. He had the advantage in reach. Perhaps he could keep Walt at a distance. Bill might have some ideas on that score. He put that idea in the back of his mind. He could ask Bill tomorrow. He barely noticed the walk. He saw that he was home and went inside the building. Lydia was waiting for him. They decided the night before that she would not go to the gym to see the announcement, but instead she had kindly made dinner. "What's the big news?" she asked. "Wallopin' Walt," he said. She looked puzzled. They talked over the possible matchups, but Walt had hardly been considered, as Carson had at that time thought it unlikely. "The other one?" "The other one," he said, nodding. "Walt is going to be a tough fight." Lydia got it immediately. "Jake did this," she said. "He's trying to make you lose so that he can have you do those awful jobs. And probably just to make a point, and because he can't stand out and have anyone stand up to him, even a little. All true, Carson said. Lydia sat him down at the table. Then he kissed him on top of his head and whispered in his ear, I want you to beat that Walt guy so he can shove it in Jake's face. Carson nodded. He wanted to win as well, of course, but wanting it didn't make him any closer to that victory. He slept poorly that night, thinking of the upcoming fight and whether Bill would be able to give him an edge. Next morning, he kissed Lydia goodbye and went to the gym early. Bill was there, as he so often was. He wasn't training anyone else at the moment, but seemed to be reading the morning newspaper and drinking some coffee from a tin cup, sitting on the edge of the ring and using the lowest rope to help hold up his paper. Carson, he called as soon as he saw him. Carson hustled over. Hi, Bill, he said, but stopped, not knowing what to say first. Thinking about that fight with Wallop and Walt, I see, Bill said, giving him a look while taking a sip of coffee. Carson just looked back, not saying anything, as the truth was obvious to both of them. Well, I'm sure you know what my real advice is, Bill finally added. Carson nodded, but I haven't figured that piece out yet. Shame, Bill said. But let's get you ready anyway. I've seen his fights, and I've seen you fight, and I have some ideas. Good, said Carson, without enthusiasm. Bill took a sip of coffee. Do a coffee cake run for me, he said, handing Carson some change. Hopefully your head will be on better when you get back. Carson started to run, and though he was a little miffed at Bill for making him run, he couldn't fault him when, a few minutes later, his head had cleared and the problem of the upcoming fight was displaced by the exertions of running. By the time he got back with the coffee cake, he was instead thinking about the fight positively and what he might do to win. Bill just smiled as he took the coffee cake, which he didn't eat immediately. What did you learn about Walt last night? Bill asked. What do you know about him from seeing him exercise? He's strong, Carson said. Brutally strong. He's probably stronger than I am. He's a little shorter, and I think my reach is longer than his. 2 out of 3, Bill said. He is brutally strong. You are taller, and you have a longer reach. But I know how strong you are. You're just as strong as him. You just need that unlock. Get it into your head. You can be just as strong, as brutal, as hard-hitting as anyone in the game. You just need to figure it out. The days passed. It was 1 week to go, then 4 days, then 2 days, and then it was the night of the fight. And still, Carson hadn't figured out how to get out of his own way. That's the end of the episode for this week. Hope you're enjoying it. I am definitely enjoying writing it. And still plenty more to go, obviously. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, CryptoBiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, or Mastodon. And thanks for listening. Words and Music copyright 2023, CryptoBiography, LLC. All rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.